In Japanese folklore, the ubum represents one of the most heartbreaking supernatural entities, the spirit of a woman who died during childbirth, forever trapped between worlds by her maternal instinct. These ghosts appear on misty nights near water sources, desperately seeking help for their phantom infant. They approach travelers with their baby, begging someone to hold the child while they rest. As the Good Samaritan cradles the infant, it becomes increasingly heavy, sometimes weighing hundreds of pounds, until it transforms into a stone or chunk of mud. The ubum then vanishes, leaving the helper traumatized by the encounter. Some versions describe blood dripping from the ghost's lower body, emphasizing her tragic death. These stories reflected real fears about Japan's historically high maternal mortality rates, and the cultural belief that powerful emotions could bind spirits to the earthly realm. Among Algonquian-speaking tribes, the Wendigo represented humanity's darkest transformation, the descent into cannibalistic madness. This creature was once human but became consumed by an insatiable hunger for human flesh after resorting to cannibalism during harsh winters. Wendigo psychosis was a documented psychological condition where individuals, often after experiencing starvation, became obsessed with consuming human meat and feared transforming into the mythical beasts themselves. Sufferers would experience paranoid delusions, violent impulses, and an aversion to normal food. Some would attack family members or request their own execution to prevent further harm. The condition was taken so seriously that suspected Wendigos were sometimes killed by their own communities. Modern psychiatrists have linked the syndrome to severe depression, starvation-induced psychosis, and cultural stress during particularly brutal winters. During the Victorian era's obsession with death and the afterlife, unscrupulous photographers exploited grieving families through elaborate spirit photography schemes. Using double exposure techniques, they would superimpose ghostly images of deceased loved ones into portraits with living clients. Some photographers maintained extensive files of previous clients' photographs to reuse as spirits for new customers. The fraud was so sophisticated that even educated people were deceived, paying substantial sums for these supernatural portraits. Famous mediums endorsed certain photographers, creating lucrative partnerships built on shared deception. When the tricks were eventually exposed, entire industries collapsed. But not before thousands of families had been exploited in their most vulnerable moments of grief, forever preserving their desperate hope to reconnect with the dead. The Fore tribe of Papua New Guinea practiced endocannibalism as a sacred funeral rite, consuming deceased relatives to honor them and transfer their spiritual essence to the living. Women and children typically ate the brain and nervous tissue, while men consumed muscle meat. This practice unknowingly spread kuru, a fatal prion disease similar to mad cow disease, which caused uncontrollable shaking, emotional instability, and death within months. The disease reached epidemic proportions in the 1950s, killing thousands and threatening the tribe's survival. Kuru had an incubation period of up to 50 years, meaning people continued dying decades after cannibalism ceased. The discovery of this connection earned researchers a Nobel Prize and provided crucial insights into prion diseases, forever linking this remote tribe to groundbreaking medical science. In 2010, archaeologists in Dorset uncovered evidence of a brutal mass execution from around 1000 CE. 54 Viking warriors were found decapitated in a pit, their severed heads piled separately nearby. Forensic analysis revealed the victims had fought desperately before capture. Skulls showed defensive wounds from trying to block sword strikes. The executioners were skilled, using sharp weapons to cleanly sever heads with precise cuts. Some victims were struck multiple times, suggesting they continued struggling even during execution. The bodies were stripped of weapons and valuables before burial. This massacre likely occurred after a failed Viking raid, with Anglo-Saxon locals capturing and executing the entire raiding party as an example to others. The discovery provides chilling evidence of Dark Age warfare's brutal reality. Throughout 17th and 18th century Poland, communities developed elaborate burial rituals to prevent the dead from returning as revenants. Archaeological discoveries reveal skeletons with iron sickles placed across their necks, designed to decapitate them. if they attempted to rise. Others were buried with heavy stones on their chests or metal spikes driven through their hearts. Some had their feet bound or were buried face down to confuse their sense of direction. These weren't acts of malice, but desperate attempts to protect the living from suspected vampires. The practices were so common that entire cemeteries contain hundreds of these vampire burials. Modern analysis shows many victims were likely cholera patients or individuals with physical deformities, making them scapegoats for unexplained deaths during plague outbreaks. Several Egyptian mummies discovered throughout history display horrifying expressions of eternal anguish, their mouths frozen open in silent screams. The most famous designated unknown man E was found in 1886 with his face contorted in apparent agony. Unlike typical mummification, these individuals weren't properly prepared, suggesting they may have been buried alive or died under traumatic circumstances. Modern CT scans reveal some had their hands and feet bound, while others show signs of strangulation. The preservation occurred naturally due to Egypt's dry climate, capturing their final moments of terror for eternity. Some theories suggest these were political prisoners or individuals who died suddenly during the mummification process, their bodies quickly wrapped while rigor mortis preserved their agonized expressions forever. The morning of April 16, 1947, transformed a bustling Texas port into a scene of unimaginable destruction. The French cargo ship Grand Camp, loaded with 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, caught fire while docked. Despite firefighting efforts, the ship exploded with the force of a small atomic bomb, vaporizing the vessel and everyone nearby. The blast wave was felt 100 miles away, shattered windows 40 miles distant, and created a 15-foot tsunami that swept inland. Flying debris included a 1.5-ton ship anchor found 2 miles away. The explosion triggered fires at nearby chemical plants and oil refineries, creating a hellish landscape of secondary explosions throughout the day. At least 581 people died, with thousands more injured in America's worst industrial disaster. The Horseshoe Brewery's catastrophic failure created London's deadliest alcoholic disaster. A massive wooden vat containing 135,000 gallons of porter beer suddenly ruptured, triggering a domino effect that burst several other tanks. The resulting wave of beer, estimated at over 388,000 gallons, surged through the St. Giles slum at tremendous speed. The alcoholic tsunami demolished 2 houses completely and punched through a pub wall. 8 people lost their lives, including entire families trapped in their basement homes. The beer wave was so powerful it bent iron railings and carried away heavy furniture. Rescue efforts were hampered by the overwhelming smell of alcohol, and the incident led to significant changes in brewery construction standards throughout England. What began as a routine trash burn in 1962 became America's most persistent environmental disaster. The fire spread into Centralia's abandoned coal mine shafts beneath the town, creating an underground inferno that continues burning today. The subterranean blaze produces toxic gases and causes the ground to collapse without warning, creating smoking sinkholes throughout the area. By the 1980s, carbon monoxide levels in homes became life-threatening, forcing mass evacuations. Of the original 1,000 residents, fewer than 10 remain today. Scientists estimate the fire contains enough coal to burn for another 250 years, making Centralia a modern ghost town with smoke perpetually rising from the earth like a scene from a horror movie. Boston witnessed one of history's most bizarre disasters when a 50-foot-tall molasses storage tank burst on January 15, 1919. The resulting tsunami of sticky syrup reached 25 feet high and traveled at 35 miles per hour through the North End neighborhood. The viscous wave demolished buildings, overturned vehicles, and trapped victims who couldn't escape the adhesive flood. 21 people perished, many drowning in the thick substance, while 150 others suffered injuries. The cleanup took weeks using salt water to dissolve the molasses. Remarkably, locals reported that on hot summer days for decades afterward, the streets would still emit the sweet smell of molasses seeping from sidewalk cracks. The Poltergeist trilogy became synonymous with supernatural tragedy when 4 cast members died within 6 years of the first film's release. Young actress Dominique Dunne was murdered by her abusive boyfriend, while child star Heather O'Rourke died from a misdiagnosed bowel obstruction that could have been treated. Additional deaths fueled widespread belief in a film curse, possibly connected to the production's use of real human skeletons as props instead of plastic replicas. The tragedy transformed a fictional horror story about disturbed spirits into a real-life nightmare for cast families, making the film's supernatural themes disturbingly prophetic. Michael Jackson's 1980s media manipulation included a staged photograph showing him sleeping in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, supposedly to live 150 years. The image sparked worldwide fascination with the pop star's alleged eccentricity and obsession with eternal youth. However, this was revealed as an elaborate publicity stunt orchestrated by his management team to cultivate an otherworldly persona. The chamber was actually medical equipment for treating burn victims, not a fountain of youth. The hoax perfectly captured the era's celebrity culture, where manufactured mystery and fake eccentricity became powerful tools for maintaining public fascination and media attention. Bauhaus's Bela Lugosi's Dead, which launched the Gothic music movement, was recorded under allegedly supernatural circumstances. The band captured the 9-minute epic in a single take, but witnesses reported a mysterious man dressed entirely in black silently observing from the studio corner before vanishing without explanation. Following the recording, band members experienced an unusual string of misfortunes and accidents. While likely coincidental, the legend of the song being cursed adds an appropriately dark mythology to what became goth culture's founding anthem, blurring the line between artistic creation and occult influence. Horror legend Vincent Price, famous for his distinctive voice and chilling performances in films like House of Wax, had his head cryonically preserved after death in 1993. His severed head now rests in liquid nitrogen at Arizona's Alcor Life Extension Foundation, alongside baseball great Ted Williams' head. The process involves draining blood, replacing it with cryoprotectants, and cooling to minus 196 degrees Celsius. Price's family hoped future technology might resurrect the actor, making his death merely an intermission rather than a final curtain. The irony is palpable, the master of horror becoming a real-life scientific experiment in defeating death. Japanese intelligence officer Hiro Onoda continued World War II combat operations in the Philippines until 1974, fighting alone for 29 years after the official surrender. He dismissed leaflets announcing Japan's defeat as enemy propaganda and ignored searchers calling his name. Onoda maintained his military discipline, living off the land while conducting guerrilla warfare against local authorities. Only when his original commanding officer flew to the Philippines and formally relieved him of duty did Onoda finally surrender. His story demonstrates the extreme dedication possible when military training and nationalist fervor override all contradictory evidence. Project Habakkuk represented one of World War II's most ambitious engineering concepts, constructing an unsinkable aircraft carrier from picrete, a composite material mixing wood pulp with ice. British scientists proved the material's durability by firing bullets into test blocks, demonstrating its resistance to damage. A full-scale prototype was actually built in Canada, complete with refrigeration systems to maintain structural integrity. However, the project was ultimately abandoned due to enormous costs and logistical complexities. The concept shows how desperate wartime innovation led to genuinely bizarre but scientifically sound solutions that pushed engineering boundaries. Aquagenic urticaria represents one of medicine's cruelest ironies, being allergic to the substance essential for life. Lindsay Kubre suffers from this incredibly rare condition where any water contact triggers excruciating hives and burning sensations. She cannot shower for more than 10 seconds, cannot cry without severe reactions, and cannot drink water as her body treats it as a dangerous foreign substance. She survives primarily on milk and heavy antihistamine regimens. This condition demonstrates how the human body can turn against the most basic elements needed for survival, making ordinary activities potential torture. Dwight Schrute's fictional family history from The Office includes the absurd Battle of Schrute Farms, allegedly a Civil War engagement where his ancestor participated. According to Dwight's elaborate mythology, this was a pivotal but unrecognized conflict involving his beet farm as a crucial Underground Railroad stop. The battle supposedly consisted of two soldiers, one from each side, accidentally shooting each other simultaneously over a beet field dispute. While completely fictional, this backstory perfectly captures the character's tendency to inflate mundane family farming into grandiose historical significance, making vegetables into war casualties. During World War II, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops became the military's most creative unit, composed entirely of artists, designers, and sound engineers. Their mission involved elaborate battlefield deception using inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, and massive speakers to simulate entire armored divisions. They successfully convinced German forces of Allied presence where none existed, diverting enemy resources and saving thousands of actual soldiers' lives. This ghost army demonstrates how creativity and illusion became legitimate weapons of war, proving that sometimes the most effective military strategy involves nothing more than convincing theater and artistic imagination. Dr. Oliver Sacks documented a gifted musician who developed visual agnosia after brain damage, losing the ability to recognize faces and objects despite having perfect vision. The patient would attempt to place his wife's head on his own, genuinely believing it was his hat. He could perform complex musical pieces flawlessly, but couldn't identify a glove when shown one. This condition illustrates how the brain constructs reality through interpretation, and when that system fails, the world becomes an incomprehensible collection of shapes and forms, making even loved ones unrecognizable objects. Cotard's delusion creates the horrifying belief that one is already dead, doesn't exist, or is actively decomposing. Patients may claim their blood has drained away or their organs have disappeared. Some refuse food entirely, reasoning that dead people don't need nourishment. This rare psychiatric condition traps sufferers in a nightmarish existence where they experience life while being absolutely convinced they're deceased. The syndrome reveals how fragile our sense of existence truly is, and how the brain can create realities more terrifying than any horror fiction when its perception centers malfunction. Fatal familial insomnia is a hereditary prion disease that systematically destroys the brain's ability to sleep. Victims experience complete insomnia for months, leading to rapid mental deterioration, paranoia, vivid hallucinations, and inevitable death. There is no cure or treatment. One documented Italian patient meticulously recorded his psychological decline over 9 months as the disease stripped away his sanity before claiming his life. The condition represents a uniquely terrifying form of death. Being fully conscious and aware as your mind disintegrates from the most basic biological function, being permanently broken. Jill Price became one of the first diagnosed cases of highly superior autobiographical memory, HSAM, a condition allowing perfect recall of every life experience. Rather than viewing this as a superpower, Price describes it as a curse. She cannot forget painful memories, traumatic experiences, or embarrassing moments. They replay constantly in vivid detail. Every heartbreak, loss, and humiliation remains as fresh as the day it occurred. Her condition reveals the merciful nature of normal human forgetting, showing how our brain's tendency to let painful memories fade protects our psychological well-being and ability to move forward. Hong Kong witnessed one of its most disturbing crimes in 1999 when 3 individuals kidnapped 23-year-old nightclub hostess Fan Man Yi over a debt dispute. They held her captive for an entire month, subjecting her to systematic torture before ultimately killing her. The perpetrators then decapitated their victim and grotesquely sewed her head inside a Hello Kitty stuffed toy. Perhaps most shocking was that one of the killers was only 14 years old, demonstrating how violence can corrupt even children. The case became internationally notorious for its combination of prolonged cruelty and the jarring juxtaposition with an innocent children's character. German resident Gunther Stoll wrote a single mysterious word, Yogtze, on paper before leaving his house in 1984. Hours later, he was found dying in his crashed car, having somehow ended up in a ditch miles away. His final words to a witness were chilling. "It was my fault. It was about 4 men." He died shortly after without explaining the cryptic message or identifying the mysterious quartet. Despite extensive investigation, neither the meaning of Yogtze nor the identity of the 4 men was ever discovered, leaving behind one of Germany's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. On June 7, 1992, 3 women vanished without explanation from a Springfield, Missouri home in one of America's most perplexing disappearances. Susie Streeter, Stacy McCall, and Cheryl Levitt left behind their purses lined up neatly inside, containing all their cigarettes, money, and car keys. The only sign of disturbance was a broken porch light globe. Despite extensive investigations and numerous theories, no trace of the women has ever been found. The case haunts investigators because everything suggested they intended to return, yet they simply vanished into thin air, leaving families with decades of unanswered questions. Brazil's most bizarre unsolved case occurred in 1966 when 2 electronics technicians were discovered dead on a remote hill, wearing homemade lead masks and waterproof coats. A cryptic note found with their bodies read, "1630, be at the agreed place. 1830 swallow capsules. After effect protect metals, wait for mask signal." The men had no apparent reason to be there, and toxicology reports were inconclusive. UFO researchers theorized they were attempting alien contact, believing the lead masks would protect them from extraterrestrial radiation. Their deaths remain unexplained, blending suicide, potential poisoning, and otherworldly obsession. In 1970, Norway's Isdalen Valley yielded one of the Cold War's most mysterious corpses. The unidentified woman had methodically removed all clothing labels and possessed multiple passports under different identities. Her notebook contained complex coded messages that remain partially undeciphered. Intelligence experts believe she was a Cold War spy who met a violent end, possibly assassinated by enemy agents. The case remains officially unsolved, with her true identity, nationality, and mission buried with her. Her death represents the shadowy world of espionage where lives are erased as completely as clothing labels. James Buchanan, the 15th U.S. president, remains the only lifelong bachelor to hold the office, but his personal life harbored secrets. He shared a Washington residence for years with Alabama Senator William Rufus King, a relationship that drew mockery from contemporaries. President Andrew Jackson nicknamed King Miss Nancy, while other politicians called the pair Aunt Fancy and Miss Nancy. Modern historians increasingly interpret their unusually close relationship as romantic, suggesting Buchanan may have been America's first and only gay president, forced to hide his true nature in a less tolerant era. In 1982, 2 drifters high on LSD committed a bizarre ritualistic double murder at Corpsewood Manor, a remote Georgia estate. Convinced they possessed magical powers, the perpetrators believed their victims were demonic entities. The killers murdered an ex-professor and his companion, then consumed their hearts, believing this cannibalistic act would grant them supernatural abilities. The case represents a chilling intersection of drug-induced psychosis and occult beliefs, demonstrating how altered mental states can lead to unthinkably violent acts in isolated locations where help is far away. Roman Emperor Herod Agrippa, I suffered one of history's most gruesome deaths in 44 AD. According to historian Josephus, the emperor was suddenly struck by severe abdominal pain and was eaten by worms over 5 agonizing days. Modern medical experts believe this description points to either fatal intestinal parasites or Fournier's gangrene, a rapidly spreading infection. The biblical account in Acts of the Apostles confirms this horrific end, describing how the powerful ruler was literally consumed from within, transforming from emperor to victim of microscopic invaders. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden met his end in 1771 through an extraordinary display of excess. His final meal consisted of lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and champagne, but the fatal element was dessert, 14 servings of hetväg, a traditional semla bun served in hot milk. This indulgence proved lethal, with medical records listing digestion problems as the cause of death. The incident demonstrates how even royalty wasn't immune to the consequences of extreme overindulgence.